Hey everybody, Sharpie here, and I think it's time to do a full LCS player tier list as we're getting closer and closer to that first game of LCS 2024, downsizing to only 8 teams, so we're going to have a little bit smaller of a list here, but I feel like with a list this concise, we can actually go through and tier list them a little bit more comfortably. So, I have the teams arranged, the player list arranged by team. So first we've got 100 Thieves, followed by Cloud9, then Dignitas, FlyQuest, Immortals, NRG, Shopify Rebellion, and lastly Team Liquid. That's in no particular order, that's just how they're ordered on the LCS page for the LCS the lol.fandom.com website, where you can kind of see a lot of the information on there. That's where they confirm the roster swaps, etc. At least that's one of the resources I go to, and to confirm, make sure I have all the players in there, get all their profile pictures, etc. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into this. And first off, we're going to be taking a look at Sniper. Now, Sniper hasn't played before. We haven't really seen much of him in actual competitive play, although solo queue, he's been an absolute menace, and we've been excited about this kid for years. Now, some people might jump on the bandwagon and say, we're going to throw him up in S tier. Other people will say, you know what, he's very unproven, we're going to put him in B or C tier. Me, I buy into the hype a little bit. So you know what, I'm not going to put him C or B. I'm going to give him comfortably an A tier spot. I think this team is built around giving him the opportunity to carry, the opportunity to show what they've got. He's got a great jungler next to him in Quid, and I think there's a lot of, in River rather, not Quid, River is their jungler, and they got a lot of upside for this top jungle, especially with this new map updates. I think he's going to be able to do a lot to show that he can be a carry. All right, up next is the jungler we were talking about, River. Now, I would argue that River was the best player on last year's Golden Guardians squad. Rest in peace, Golden Guardians. He was very good. His Jarvan is one of the best in the world, although Contractz show that he can play it at a similar level at Worlds. But River is a very solid player, and I think despite how things kind of fell apart at Worlds, the play-ins, it wasn't really his fault. So along with Sniper, I'm going to drop him very comfortably up there into that A tier. Next is their mid laner. Now, Quid was very questionable last year on 100 Thieves, and it could have something to do with the fact that you were there with Doublelift, and the team's going to play for Doublelift, and you've got a lot of things that aren't really working, and you just kind of say, screw everybody else, Doublelift's going to be our win condition, and he's going to 1v9. Now, that's not exactly a healthy way to run a team, and it's no surprise they didn't do well. But Quid certainly did not show a lot of promise, and he didn't really stand out to me much at all. So I'm not very excited about him moving forward, and I'm going to drop him down into the D tier. Next, we've got their AD carry, another new face in Meech. Now, Meech, I know, was on that DSG roster last year, and the DSG roster did very well in the amateur, the NACL. But I didn't get to see too much of him. I didn't watch too much of the NACL, and I know people were excited about him, but they weren't nearly as vocal about him as compared to some of these other players like Sniper, like Massu, like FakeGod coming back. So I'm going to take Meech here, and I don't think he's going to be bad. I don't think he's going to be particularly good. I think he has a lot to prove. I'm going to put him into the C tier. Finally, we've got Eyla. Now, Eyla and Vulcan had that kind of back and forth with each other last year, and Eyla clearly came out on top, not just in-game, but also on Twitter, taking the local LCS Twitter menace and getting him to basically retire from his banger tweets that he'd been up to for a while, completely silencing that whole debate. So that is a big shining light in favor of Eyla. Now, when he was on FlyQuest, he didn't look that great. Moving from there, he looked a lot better. So I think he's going to be a good middle of the pack support for 100 Thieves. I think it might be a little bit difficult. He might not look as good because he's got some new players around him, and he might have to, get a bit of a learning curve to get the players fully, on board and moving. So either way, I think he's going to be a good middle of the pack serviceable support, and as such, I'm going to be dropping him comfortably into the B tier. All right, up next is Cloud9. Now, Cloud9, a lot of people are very excited about this roster. They're thinking this team is going to win Spring Split, this team is going to win Summer Split, this team is going to do very well at Worlds, and they definitely have the firepower to do so. Now, the question is, as I just realized I have Blaber and Berserker swapped to the wrong spots there, the question is that I have is, do they perhaps have too much firepower? And is it one of those situations where you have so many, stars on your roster, so many carries and big personalities that no one is really willing to sack it? No one is really willing to step onto the back burner. Berserker is used to being a carry. Vulcan is used to being a big personality. Jojo's used to being a big personality and like the 1v9 solo carry. So I'm concerned for how this team is going to pan out. That being said, I think this team is still individually going to be very good. Fudge, I don't know if he's going to be the best top laner. I think some of the other top laners are still better than him, at least one or two are, and we'll get into that in the future, but I still think he's going to be one of your top 3, maybe top 4 top laners in the league, and as such, I'm not going to put him in S tier, but I'm going to put him very comfortably up in A tier. Up next is Blaber. Now, Blaber, you could argue that he was the best jungler, although I think you also have a good case to say Contractz was the best jungler of the LCS last year. But Blaber is definitely in the conversation, and he has a very strong case for him. And not only that, he's been consistently good, whereas Contractz seemed to really only have that one good split and then going into Worlds to make, quarterfinals and play very impressively, particularly in that series against G2. That being said, I still think Blaber is a top, not just jungler, but a top player in the LCS, and I expect him to do very well. I expect him to be an early contender for that MVP of the split, and I'm going to very comfortably and confidently drop him into the S tier. Up next is Jojopyun. Now, Jojo looked very good. He was like the only reason that EG did anything last year, and he was very having to hard carry that team even though they didn't make it to Worlds. He was the only reason they did as well as they did. He has shown himself continuously to be a good player, and although he has backed off a little bit of that hypey youthful aggression, he's a lot more calculated, and I think he's a very talented player. I think he's a contender for the best mid laner and also a contender for going to be the MVP of Spring Split up ahead, and as such I will also be very comfortably dropping him into S tier. Cloud9's AD carry, same as last year, same as I believe the year before that, is Berserker. Berserker, another one of those players who is just very good. Clearly was, in my opinion, the best AD carry of the split for LCS and was a top AD carry in the world. Now, Prince had his moments last year where he showed that he could be better, but Prince also had those moments where he did nothing. And that whole FlyQuest experiment unfortunately fell apart. So Berserker either way is just going to be the best AD carry. I don't see any new AD carry stepping in to take that spot from him. So Berserker is going to be your number 1 AD carry moving forward into this upcoming year. And as such, not just the fact that he's the best AD carry, but the fact that he's just a mechanical god, I'm going to be putting him into S tier as well. Finally is the support. Now, Vulcan is a weird case. He's had some high highs, but last year when he moved on to that FlyQuest roster, he was supposed to bandage up some of those wounds and make that FlyQuest roster solid. But despite him joining, I would argue that the FlyQuest roster got worse. And it's hard to say if it was his fault or not. Now, sure, Dhokla was not performing very well. The team cohesion was not really there. But Vulcan also seemed to really tilt off the face of the earth. His tweets were very confusing about already wanting to go on vacation, even though they're only halfway through the split. And I really wonder about how well he's going to perform, especially if things don't start off how they intended to. It's another time where Vulcan's coming onto what's supposed to be a superstar roster, and it's going to be very scary if things don't kick off with the bang right away and they struggle a little bit. I worry for Vulcan. I worry that despite him being good, he might put too much pressure on himself to kind of amend some of the mistakes of last year. And so as such, I'm actually going to drop him as low as B tier. I think he can easily jump back up to S tier, but at the same time, if things go wrong, he could drop right down to that D or even F tier. and just completely tilt off the face of the earth. So for now, I'm putting him right next to his arch nemesis Eyla in B tier. The third team we're going to be taking a look at is Dignitas. Now, Dignitas is going to be, in my opinion, one of the most fun, if not the most fun team to watch. They're a team that's not afraid to pick weird stuff. They let Rich kind of cook. They let him do whatever he wants to do, picking the Alawi, picking the Quinn, picking the silly stuff that no one else really seems to do, and surprisingly, he makes it work. Rich, I think, is the star of this roster. I think Rich is going to be their win condition. I think if they win a lot of games, it'll be because of Rich. If they lose a lot of games, it won't be because of Rich. So, as such, Rich, I've been debating back and forth between putting him A tier and S tier, but the more I think about it, I think I'm actually going to bump him up to S tier. I think just his ability and how he made that Dignitas roster last year viable. He made them a team to like a dark horse pushing into playoffs to maybe upset and take a game or two away from some teams. Rich solo carried quite a few of those games, and I think as he gets more and more comfortable in his transition away from Heroes of the Storm into League of Legends, he will really come into form this upcoming year. Up next is the player eXyu. Now, in the LCS Discord, a lot of players are very, I wouldn't say a lot, but there's a small community of people who are very excited about eXyu. And I'm gonna be honest, I'm not sure why. Some of his prior experience, he didn't look like he was going to be the next big player. He didn't look like, Blaber when he first came into the LCS, or he didn't look like one of these, the next big guy. So I'm not really sure how he's going to do. He's going to have a great top laner to go next to him, and the rest of his team also is kind of shaky. So I wonder if it's going to be a Kenvi on Immortals last year situation where he has some promise, but he doesn't have the team around him to really let him shine. And ultimately, he just doesn't really do much of anything. I'm not going to drop him as low as D tier because I think he has enough, unknowns about him to not drop him that low. So I'm going to put him next to Meech there and put him in C tier. Up next is Dove. Now, Dove, I don't know too much about either. I know it was kind of confusing that they went for him, where there were a lot of other players you could have gone for. I'm not really understanding why you would pick Dove. Maybe it's just because of a budget type thing, and he was an import that you could bring in for cheap. Maybe it helps Rich feel a bit more comfortable. I'm not sure. But Dove, I think, is going to be all right. He's going to be serviceable. I'm going to right now tentatively put him in the C tier because I think it might take him some time to transition. And I worry that with a player like Dove, it's going to be one of the situations where you're coming more for the lifestyle instead of the actual competitive drive. Fourth for Dignitas is Tomo. Now, Tomo, I was not impressed with last year. He did not really seem to be catching his stride yet, although he had moments where he showed upside. There were definite flashes of brilliance, and I think he can definitely get there. I think with the right infrastructure around him and more coaching, give him another year or two, and he can absolutely be a solid AD carry in the region. I just don't think he's there yet. As such, I'm going to drop him into D tier. I think he's got a ways to go. I think he's clearly shown he's not quite ready to be a high caliber player in the LCS yet, but I'm going to say I hope he proves me wrong. Maybe putting him on the D tier will be something to kind of kick him in the pants a little bit and say, I'm going to put it into overdrive and I'm going to go and be a carry in this region. Up last for Dignitas is Isles. Now, we saw Isles show up on C9 for a little while and he looked all right, although it wasn't really him being the carry. He kind of played a little bit more of a silent support, not really being the one proactively calling for or doing things, but more kind of riding on the coattails of a team that was already very good. So especially the fact that he's paired with a bunch of unknowns and he doesn't really have much of a track record behind him of being a star player, I'm not sure if he's going to do well either. What we have seen of him wasn't as impressive as some of the other supports that we've placed right now into B tier. So Isles, I'm going to drop next to his AD carry into D tier. All right, the next team we're going to be looking at is FlyQuest. Now, I've said this before, FlyQuest is the most confusing roster I have seen. It's almost like, you know, a throwback to the early days of the LCS when we brought in a bunch of European players. I really don't understand what they're trying to do with this. Bwipo, and I'm going to start off with the top lane. Bwipo as a player, yes, he's been to a Worlds Finals with Fnatic, but since then, he's been kind of confusing. He didn't exactly shine or mesh well with Team Liquid. He took a year off. He took a year off to, you know, do other things, to pursue streaming. I think he did some coaching as well. And now he's back as a top laner, and I'm not very excited for it. I don't know how he's going to compare up to the likes of Rich, up to the likes of Fudge, up to the likes of some of these other top laners that we're going to see. We have a very stacked top lane, and I do worry that he's not going to make the cut, if you will. And I would not be surprised, actually, if it doesn't go well, that that a team like FlyQuest reaches out to a player along the lines of Revenge, or maybe reaches out to Licorice and say, we want you have a bit more of a track record of dominance topside, and we want you to sub in and fill up this gap. So Bwipo, I'm going to be dropping into a C tier for him because I still think he has the talent. I just don't know if he still has access to it. Up next is Inspired, and Inspired is a very good jungler. I really like Inspired. He's one of the best junglers that the West has ever produced. I don't know if he's going to be good on this team though. Bwipo is very questionable. Jensen is coming off of his worst split that he's had. And then he's got a very untested bot lane. So I think there's going to be a lot of weight on him. He's also to really carry and be the shot caller, be the driving force moving forward. And I worry that it's not going to go well, especially if things for their solo lanes or their bot lane kind of falter. Because like I said, we have a lot of powerhouse top lanes. We have a lot of powerhouses in the mid lane. And we have one or two really powerful bot lanes as well. And I'm really concerned that he's just not going to stack up to them. I think as an individual, he is absolutely an S tier jungler. On FlyQuest, I'm going to bump him down to A tier. Mid laner for FlyQuest is Jensen. Now, Jensen, like I said, is coming off of arguably his worst split over there on Dignitas. And I'm not excited to watch him play this upcoming year. I think he's on a decline. He's had, again, flashes of brilliance, but they're becoming more and more few and far between. And I worry that this is probably going to be his last split, or at worst, his last year playing in LCS before he inevitably transitions to coaching or streaming or something like that, because he absolutely has the knowledge. He absolutely has the mechanics, he has the game knowledge, but I feel like the way that the meta has shifted over the years has moved away from him, and he has not adapted to it nearly as well as some of these other long-standing players like Impact, like Bjergsen did, like Doublelift has. So Jensen, although he was the guy a few years ago and was absolutely the best mid laner in the league, seasons past, I'm actually going to be dropping him all the way to D tier. AD carry for FlyQuest, and this is probably one of the, if next to Sniper, the most excited players or fans have been for a new rookie in the LCS, Massu. Now, Massu, again, I don't know too much about. I haven't been watching or keeping up with the NACL as much as I really should be, and this is an impromptu video that I decided to throw together without too much research into it. However, I know Massu people are touting as being a mechanical genius, and he's very talented in lane, very talented with his team fight and his ability to put out damage. And just from the hype that people are seeing around him, I'm actually going to put him up reasonably high for a rookie. Now, I'm not going to put him up there next to Sniper, because I think Sniper's track record for how long people have been excited about him, for how long he's been a prodigy, reaching challenger at such a young age, 13 or 14 or whatever it was. Massu does not have that track record behind him. He does not have those accolades, but Massu is still the most hyped up AD carry, and next to Sniper, the most hyped up rookie coming into the split. So I'm going to put him into B tier. Finally is Busio. Now, Busio is an interesting one. he had the opportunity, I'm going to say the opportunity to be nice, he had the opportunity to play next to Doublelift as a rookie. And playing next to Doublelift is a double-edged sword. Because on the one hand, you get to play next to one of the most storied and one of the most talented and historically consistent, not just AD carries, but players that not just the LCS, but the entire league scene as a whole across the globe have seen. He's consistently made it to Worlds. He's got so many titles and accolades to him. But then there's the flip side of that coin where, you know, you see it in other sports. You know, you see it with baseball, not baseball, with the NBA. You see it with football, where these storied legends of their field would rather move to other kind of pre-established super team rosters, and they don't really want to put the effort into training up these new rookies. So I wonder how well Busio is going to look when he's not able to, I guess you could say, hide behind Doublelift this upcoming season, and he's going to be paired next to another rookie in Massu. Busio, I think, could be good. It could turn out that being next to Doublelift was monumental for his career, but it could also turn out that, you know, being next to such a big player overshadowed his growth and stunted it and made it more difficult for him to grow into the player that he has the potential to be. So I'm going to tentatively put him into C tier, but it could easily move up. He just needs to prove it. All right, up next is Immortals. And Immortals is a team that I know a lot of people were very confused about with some of their imports, particularly Castle and Mask. People weren't so upset about Olleh because he's been around the scene a lot and he reached rank 1 in Korean solo queue, but Castle and Mask, particularly Castle, people were pretty upset about. Regardless, I'm going to rank them on their skill. And as a bit of a biased fan towards Immortals, I'm really excited to watch this team because I think they're going to be a really fun team to watch. I did go and VOD review for Castle and Mask, and Castle is an interesting player. For all the VODs that I watched, he never was the reason the team lost the game. So he has a big upside with that. But at the same time, he never really solo won a game either. He's not going to be your primetime Summit, where he just comes through, picks Gnar, and he's at your inhibitor turret in 15 minutes. That being said, the times where I did see the jungler go topside and give him a bit of a lead, he absolutely ran away with it, and late game, his team fighting, positioning, flanking, and knowledge were impeccable. So I'm very excited to watch him play, and from talking with Immortal staff, he definitely has a chip on his shoulder for being benched in KT Academy in favor of the player Perfect. So Castle, I think, is going to be absolutely a player to watch, but I'm not going to be so delusional to place him super high in the rankings. I'm going to place him comfortably in B tier. I think he has a lot of potential and a lot to prove. Up next is Armao. Now, Armao is an interesting one. He got just like Castle, he got benched in favor of another player, and in his case, it was Shiden. Now, I think it's less because of Armao being bad. I don't think Armao was the problem at all. I don't think he was a bad player at all. I think it was more along the lines of the meta developed, plus they had this new player who was doing very well in the jungle, and they wanted to see what they had. So I think Armao is still going to be very good. And I think particularly on this Immortals team, this is provided that the structure around this team is good. I think Immortals is one of the best rosters that Armao could end up on, because Armao is very much a facilitator jungler. He has the potential to play carries, but he's best on those engaged type tanks. He's really good at setting up his team for success. And players like Castle, players like Tactical, we've seen how high their highs then can be. They just, like, particularly in the form of Tactical, in the past few years, we haven't seen a team built around facilitating that. We've had so many inconsistencies with it, and I think on this roster could be just like FlyQuest was 2 years ago, where they randomly came together and made LCS finals 2 years in a row. I think this Immortals roster could unironically do the same. So Armao, I'm not going to put super high, but just to kind of finish up that talk, I think Immortals could easily be a team just like Energy was last year, where they're greater than the sum of their parts. Armao is going to be a great fit on this team, and so I think I'm going to place him very comfortably into B tier. He could even easily push up into A tier. Up next is Mask. Now, for the people who don't know much about Mask or haven't watched him, they're going to say, oh, here's some mid laner that was kicked out of Korea and went to ERL and was on some team that didn't even win anything. Yes, they didn't win much of anything, but he was absolutely the best player on that Unicorns of Love roster. And he was the only reason they went as high as they did. And other content creators in the scene, particularly LS, have spoken very highly on this player. And from the VODs that I watched, he looks very good. I think he's going to match up quite well against some of these other mid laners in the league. And I think he could easily, with his very diverse champion pool, become a big talking point in the LCS. I'm not going to go too much onto him because I've already talked enough about Immortals as it is. So I'm just going to say it. I'm dropping Masks into A tier. Up next is Tactical. Now, Tactical, like I said, is a player who has We've talked about it. He has arguably the highest ceiling for an AD carry in the LCS, and I think that still stands today. His ceiling is unreal. However, he makes simple mistakes every once in a while, and they cost games. He gets into a bad situation and he tilts. And I think on a team like this, that's going to not be so much of an issue. He's got a much stronger roster around him than he's had in the past few years. He has a very good support in Olleh, and I think this whole year moving forward, there's a reason, in my opinion, he decided to come back to Immortals, and I think it's because he knows this is going to be a potentially very good team. So Tactical, I'm not going to overrate him. I'm going to put him into B tier for now, but he could easily jump up, just like Vulcan, he could easily jump up into that S tier, and he could easily drop down into that F tier. He just needs to prove it, and we will be adjusting this series as the weeks go by, but he could easily go anywhere on this list, so I'm going to be safe and put him into B tier. Finally is Olleh. Now, Olleh's kind of been out of the scene for a little bit, doing his military service, but now he's back. And you worry about, like with Bwipo taking a year off, taking some time off, I'm concerned about how he's going to come back. With Olleh, I'm not. He comes back and immediately hits ranked 1 in solo queue. I think he's going to be very good. Reaching rank 1 in solo queue in Korea, particularly as a support, means that you know how to call, you know how to do macro, you know how to bring your team to victory. So I think Olleh is going to continue in his form as a very good support, and I'm going to drop him next to Mask in A tier. Up next is NRG. And the first player on NRG is Dhokla. Now, Dhokla is a player I've been excited to watch for quite a while. I was a big fan of his way back in the day when he was on that old, I believe it was that old Optic squad, and I thought he had a lot of potential. I loved watching him pick Yorick and do kind of those more off-meta things, and then he went into the NACL chamber and came back as a legend. And in my opinion, this might sound a little bit delusional, but I think you can easily make the case that Dhokla, especially the way that he performed at Worlds, is a top 5 top laner in the world. Dhokla is a top 5 top laner in the world. And that being said, there is no other argument you can make. Dhokla is S tier, and he absolutely deserves his spot there. Up next is Contractz, and Contractz, I think, I'm just going to keep it real simple. Contractz, you can easily argue, is a top, I don't know if you can argue a top 5, just because of how stacked the jungle pool is, but I would easily argue a top 10 jungler in the world. His highs are insane. The way that he absolutely destroyed G2 is something that's going to live in my head forever as a fan of NA, and no further ado, Contractz going straight into S tier. Up next is Palafox, and just like the other two, he was a very good mid laner. Now, the issue with Palafox, and don't get me wrong, he's going into S tier. The issue with Palafox isn't anything that's his fault. It's entirely the way that the draft went. I would have loved to see him play up against some mid laners that were a bit higher caliber. Sure, he got to play up against Caps, and he was clearly the best mid laner, and it was not close. However, I would have loved to see him go up against Knight, to go up against Chovy, to go up against Faker, because that matchup would have proven just how good is Palafox. And I think this team is going to do very well. They're going to continue to go to international, and I'm hoping next year Palafox will be able to prove what he can do against some of the top mid laners in the world. I think it's still upwards from here, and he has not reached his ceiling. So Palafox, along with the rest of his team so far, is going into S tier. Up next is FBI. Now, FBI is an interesting case. He's very good, but he's not Berserker, if that makes sense. He was not that player that's going to be that, star performer, legend of your team. He's going to be your very consistent, I will slowly carry the game as it gets to late game. I will do very well in laning phase, and I won't lose you the game. He is a rock. He's probably the most stable AD carry you could have. And because of that, I'm not going to put him into S tier, just because I think the highs that some of the other AD carries have, particularly Berserker, are just higher than that. But FBI is still a very good AD carry, and I think you could easily argue he's probably going to be the second best AD carry in the league. I'm going to put him into A tier though, mostly because of the way that his play style is and not because of him actually as a player. Finally is Huhi. Now, FBI and Huhi have played together before. They've won LCS together before. And Huhi is a player that's been around for a long time and has continued to be very good, whether it was in mid lane with CLG or support across a variety of different teams. Huhi is good. I don't know if he's an upgrade over Ignar though, because Ignar is just that good of a support. We saw how good his shot calling was on Misfits way back in the day against T1, when they took T1 to game 5. Huhi, either way though, is a very good support. He's clearly more stable, and I think going to be a lot better out the bat than other supports like Eyla or Vulcan. So I'm going to put him into A tier. Up next, the 7th team and second to last team is Shopify Rebellion. And the first one we're going to take a look at here is FakeGod. Now, in the past, FakeGod did not impress me at all. He was on Dignitas and looked like he was easily the worst top laner in the split. And we saw, I forget who it was, but someone posted a documentary, like a short documentary about his career and how he left and almost quit. And then he came back, got a spot with DSG, and is now looking a lot stronger. And I'm hopeful that he does the exact same trajectory as Dhokla, and he comes back and is a lot more mature, a lot more stable, a lot more confident as a player, and shows that he deserves to be back in the LCS. That being said, I don't know how good he's actually going to end up. So without him being, rated too high or too low, I'm putting him in B tier, and he can prove me wrong by going up the standings. Up next is Bugi. Now, Bugi on TSM was okay. Just okay. I don't think he's a player you want to build a roster around, and I'm glad they didn't. They built it more around Insanity, in my opinion, and I think that's a great call to make. That being said, Bugi has a lot to prove. He did not look great in his first split, and he was carried by the next player, Insanity, who we'll get to in a little bit. Insanity was basically the reason they won most of the games they did, and there's a reason he got Player of the Week so many times. So, but we'll talk about Insanity in a second. Bugi, I'm going to drop him into D tier. I think he's got a lot to prove, and what he has already shown did not look exactly exemplary. All right, Insanity time. Insanity, I know he's been quietly underrated across the scene, but in my opinion, Insanity has potentially the highest skill ceiling of all the mid laners in the LCS. The way that he took that TSM roster that was doing absolutely nothing and was just straight up single-handedly winning them games impressed me so much. Not to mention, when we saw him on Optic back in the days with Dhokla, he was willing to play just about whatever, throwing down AP Kog'Maw. He's now throwing down the Lethality Graves mid and winning with it. And if you give him even better of a team, I think that he could easily be the best mid laner in the split. If you dropped him onto a C9, if you dropped him onto a NRG, he would be a star. However, he's on Shopify Rebellion, which is not nearly as star-studded of a roster. Either way, I still think he's just that good. And because you have Insanity, this will be a playoff team. And because Insanity is the reason you do that, and because he's just that good, I'm putting him S tier. And I think he deserves that. And I think as this split and next split go on, a lot more people will be putting him up there in the conversation as the greatest player and as the greatest like low NA player, along with Palafox and Jojopyun. Up next is Bvoy. Now, Bvoy, a lot of people don't like. They don't like that he came in to the LCS. They don't like that Shopify picked him up, and I can understand that. He hasn't looked that great. He's not exactly a player that screams, I'm gonna win you games. So without knowing too much more about him than what I do know, is particularly on fan reactions, I'm gonna put him off in the D tier simply because we don't know what he looks like, and the general consensus is negative. Finally is Zeyzal. Now, Zeyzal is a very smart player. He looked very good back when he was on C9, and I thought it was a shame that they got rid of him and he had to go back to Academy. That being said, I'm very glad that he's back in the LCS. I think he's got a lot to prove, but I think he's going to be a very good support. I don't think he's going to be up there with, with Olleh, with, who else would be up here in the supports? I guess Huhi, but I think he'll still be good. And I initially was thinking of putting him C tier, but now the more I think about it, I'm actually going to bump him up to B tier because I think he deserves to be up there. And I think he could easily move up to A tier if he proves that he can do well. Up last is Team Liquid. Now, Team Liquid, I think, is an interesting one because their roster, I don't know what is really going to happen with this. As I'm realizing, this roster also got moved around a little bit. There we go. We've got it fixed. I'm not really sure how this one's going to pan out because they've kept their 3 bot side, which is fine. And then they brought in UmTi and they brought in Impact back to Team Liquid. Impact did not look very good on FlyQuest. UmTi comes from a lower half team that's never really been a playoff contender in the first place, and he wasn't exactly a shining star on that team. However, we do know he has a solid drive, he's a very likable player, he knows English, and he's excited to be here. I just worry that it's not going to go so well with this team, but we'll have to see how it goes. I think this team could easily be a team that's worse than the sum of their parts, just like how FlyQuest was last year. So that being said, let's go through these ratings here. Impact, I think, is going to be solid. He's not going to be exactly great. He's not going to be terrible. I think he's past his prime. Maybe he can prove me wrong. I'm going to drop him into B tier for now. Up next is UmTi, and UmTi has a lot to prove, but I'm not really sure where to start him off, simply because, coming from a bottom half LCK team, it's hard to say how that's going to transition to an LCS team. Plus the fact that you've got some decent players around you compared, and I think, this team could easily be better than some of the other teams in the LCS. So I'm going to, I've been bouncing between B and C tier. I think I'm actually going to put him in, I'm going to put him in C tier. I'm going to put him in C tier, and he can easily move up from that, though. I just don't want to overhype it because it's hard to say how this team is going to gel off the get-go. APA, I think, is mechanically very talented, but I think his champion pool is very big, but it's untested, and I worry that the prior trend of how they weren't really allowing him, we saw this drama unfold on Twitter, how they weren't allowing him to really pick the champions he wanted to pick, could continue, and he's stuck kind of playing a few simple champions, and they just kind of force him to play more of a facilitator role with the Nico, with the Talia, and not let him really get into his bag of playing characters that he really likes to play. So I think his ceiling is pretty high, but for now, I'm going to put him into B tier next to Impact. Up next is Yeon. Now, Yeon, I don't know. He's got a ways to go. He clearly has some high highs. He looked pretty good in that game against T1 up until the very end when he saved his flash for the next game against GAM. And in the GAM series, he didn't look that great either. The only reason they even won a game was because Pyosik popped off on Kindred. This whole team did not look very good at Worlds, and I worry that this collapse, even though they had some really good highs, they fell apart towards the end of last year, and I worry that trend is going to continue. I'm going to drop Yeon into C tier. Now, the final player on this list is CoreJJ. Now, CoreJJ is a very talented player. He has a very strong resume. He's been to Worlds many times. He has World Championship under his belt. He's played next to Ruler, which is, you know, arguably, you could easily make the case he's the best AD carry of all time. I don't know if he's still that player, though. I don't know if he's still that player. He doesn't seem to have that dominance that he did back in the day when it was, you know, when it was Double Lift and CoreJJ, and they were stomping bot lanes, and he was the big brain player. I haven't seen that from him. I was actually kind of hoping that he would retire this upcoming year and move to a coaching role, because he definitely still has the knowledge. I just don't know if he still is that player anymore. I think that his decline is potentially going to continue, although we might see a last surge out of him. But he's kind of along the lines of Jensen, but not quite that far down the hill yet. So the last player, CoreJJ, is going into C tier. All right, that's my list. Let me know in the comments what you agree with, if there's anything that you strongly disagree with. The list is available that you can make your own tier list. I will leave the link to that down in the description below. Thanks for watching, everybody, and looking forward to the LCS coming up very soon.